Уважаемые
Dear ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Allow me to welcome all of you at our plenary session of the second day of Climate Forum. This plenary session is entitled Government and Business Partnership, Main Directions and Prospects of Interactions. First of all, I would like to introduce you my co-moderator of this session, Ekaterina Koltsavara. She is an advisor to the chairman of the board of Rosnano company and executive director of the Council of Industrial Workers of Russia and European Union. I will not mince words and take too much of our time. Allow me just to bring up some numbers and statistics that may give you some idea about the subject of our session and give you some idea about our experts in regards of how important and pressing the issue of organizing government and business partnership and the subject of environmental protection. So here are the facts. Dear colleagues, first of all, currently 180 countries of the world, that's about 90% of them all that are represented in the United Nations, have agreed upon the necessity of coordinative efforts in order to maintain temperature growth up to 2 degrees Celsius. As a result, they also agreed on raising funds based on the projections of investing in low emissions technology. So 180 countries, almost the entire world. Russia did not ratify this agreement yet, by the way. So to follow up, where are the money? We require quite large sum of money. So where can we get them from in order to make a transition from this country's economy to low carbon economies? So based on the estimates of World Bank, in order to make a transition to the stage of a new economy type, an economy that is focused on a low carbon development, by 2030 we require an investment in amount about $700 billion per year. So first question, how exactly this money can be raised? Where can we find these resources to invest in low carbon development? And the second question, of course, are what are the priorities of spending this sum of money? I'm not going to stop on that. I can just say that the second number, currently on what we stand money-wise, 42 countries in the world, 42 national jurisdictions and 25 sub-national jurisdictions have already agreed upon where can they raise these investments. In these countries, they've adopted so-called carbon price, so a price that you have to pay for emissions of greenhouse gases. Currently, within these regulation systems, it's either a carbon tax or a system of paying for emissions. They've generated about 20 to 25 billion US dollars per year, a significant sum of which is being invested in cutting emissions projects. I've already mentioned, according to the World Bank, we have to have 700 billion US dollars by 2030. Among these 700 billion, about one-third will stem from emissions regulation, so either by adopting carbon tax or some change, or buying permits for emissions. This is where we get this 20 billion, or direct payments for emissions. So these countries have already adopted an approach that is being implemented in regards. I will speak slower for interpreters. So an approach that is implemented for both greenhouse gases or pollutants. The culprit pays. This is the approach that has been adopted in the majority of jurisdictions already. We have to note that market instruments are being developed not on the national level alone. What is important is what's being happening on the industrial level, including industrial management and regulations. One example of which is initiatives in cutting emissions that is being done in aviation industry. From 2017, according to various estimates, about 85% of airplane companies voluntarily, yes, I emphasize voluntarily, joined this initiative and implementing efforts to cut emissions. There's an opinion that is not just out there. I think it's just a fact that has been established already. I think in the nearest future, those countries and those companies that do not regulate their emissions and that are not parties to Paris Accords and do not share their values, they don't disclose information on their emissions and climatic risks and means on diminishing these risks. They can fall onto some trade sanctions and limitations. We know that quite recently European Union announced that they will not sign trade agreements with those countries that are not subject to Paris Accord, and we know that there are very few of those left, and those that haven't ratified the Paris Accords yet. This in regards of the decision of the European Union. And we know that if you don't disclose information on emissions and carbon risks and climatic risks and climatic and financial risks, we just don't put out stocks of these companies on exchange. So only with this information can you get listed. I'm not talking about recommendations that we got last year on G20 about disclosing information. These are recommendations that basically sum up all the best practices and standards currently, and now the G20 member states are basically forced to change this accountability form that first of all includes the description of climate risks. Russian Federation currently is in a transition phase of formation of these changes. I represent not big part of business. I represent Business Russia organization, and we are interested on formation such relations between the government and business in a way that they would take into account two factors. First factor being the regulation system that will be adopted in Russia, of course, has to be economically and environmentally feasible. That is without a doubt. A second factor that we often forget is that we have to take into account the interest of Russian business parties. I mean carbon protectionism. I mean that the Russian regulation system on emissions limitations, and we try to convey that to executive institutions, they have to focus on the best available standards and practices. Otherwise, we don't just have any idea of adopting this. There is no sense. We have to establish a constant dialogue between business and the government. Of course, there are a ton of questions that we still have to solve. I think that would be all. Ekaterina, you have the floor. Is this on? Yes. Yes. I introduced my co-moderator. I think he doesn't need any introduction whatsoever. A member of the General Council of All Russian Public Organization Delovaya Rossiya, or Business Russia, and the coordinator of project support, Oleg Pluzhnikov, who had just outlined the subject of our session. Also, I would like to welcome representatives of government of Moscow and thank them for organizing this wonderful event and this plenary session specifically. Today in our discussion you see that we have representatives of all vectors and all pain points of this issue. We see the representatives of Ministry of Economic Development of Russia, Ministry of Natural Resources of Russia, representatives of NGOs, private sector, academia, and also note our representatives from Kazakhstan and our friends from the UK. So we have an opportunity to hear out opinions from both the government, private sector, academia, and from overseas. On the time frame, you have, dear colleagues, 7-8 minutes tops, and we will keep 15 minutes at the end for the Q&A session. No objections? Okay. Now, my first question to the director of the Department of Ministry of Economic Development. Vladimir, please. We're all very interested in what Ministry of Economic Development of Russia is now planning in regulating greenhouse gases could you please shortly elaborate on several issues? First of all, where do we stand as is, and what's our plan next? But before you answer, I would like to also tell you the following. 3 years ago, we adopted a law on PPP, on raising investments in very complex industries and the spheres where alone private business couldn't handle with the issues and objectives that were set in front of them. Global best practices shows that in order to bring more investments in environmental subjects, I mean cutting emissions and adaptations, they account for a lot of money, several billions of Russian rubles. And world practice shows that about 80 to 90% of investments comes from private capital. How do you see the role of PPP in the formation of investment climate and for the growth, and I emphasize growth, of investments in Russia? Thank you. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak out. As for your first question, where do we stand and where are we going? Well, we have basically our the light ahead of us. Of course, these mean the directives of 2030 that are called the preparation for the ratification of Paris Accords and their further implementation. In accordance with this plan, we, well, basically haven't not having ratified this Paris Accords, we've already outlined all the positions and all the issues and all the standings and obligations that are indicated in Paris agreements. These include the development of low-carbon development strategy by 2030, also developing a national plan on adaptation to negative climate change effects, development of legislation on state regulations on cutting emissions and emissions management. So, this law firstly was branched out by the decree of our government to be split on monitoring and accounting of these emissions. So currently these two laws on monitoring and accounting and regulations on the emissions are united as one, so that it would be seen as a comprehensive legislation. And the concept of this being included in the deliberations of the government last week, with some objections and reservations, of course, but that's always happening. We will have some additional procedures with regular municipalities on reviewing some separate articles. But still, generally speaking, the first part of this law, we stipulate the obligations of legal bodies to be accountable for their emissions of greenhouse gases, starting from some threshold, of course, of 50,000 tons of CO2 or equivalent of that, or higher, on a gradual basis, so that the business could adapt to these changes and start to be accountable for that. The second part of this law is regulation, as I've mentioned. And currently, the law is formulated in a way that it doesn't really have any set limits on emissions, as it was done in the European system when they just set thresholds or limits, and based on that, they organized trade. We took a different approach. We initially want to stimulate business on implementing projects that have win-win effect. What I mean by that is projects such as initiatives in increasing energy efficiency with the use of energy resources or others. So if we use any fossil product, whether it's gas, oil, timber, with higher efficiency, then of course we cut emissions. That's logical. So all the utility projects in metallurgy and other industries, as a result of which, of course, we are trying to cut the consumption of fuel that is primarily aimed at increasing energy efficiency, they can be easily recalculated in tons of CO2 on how much we're going to cut the emissions. And these tons on the law, when, for example, for achieving these levels these thresholds, our government will, well, basically disseminate some benefits, so to speak. They can include various options. For example, white certificates, so to speak, when a state initially buys out the further certificates for some price. It can be some tax reliefs, or even a set of some stimulating incentives that in the current legislation is already out there. For example, the maintenance rate, or lenient loans, or something others. On the current stage, fortunately or unfortunately, business is not very forthcoming for that. They want to see some different numbers probably, but the price on carbon as it is now in other countries is not being planned to be implemented in the Russian Federation. Nonetheless, when the mechanisms will be into works, and we actually stipulated that in our framework, especially in the forestry projects, this price for carbon will inevitably appear. It will of course have a virtual basis. It won't be a price that will include the price of the product that is being exported. For example, why the hell do we need to raise up the price that we export overseas, right? Makes no sense. But when the government will buy out the results of cutting emissions, for example, then we have to determine what price do we set for that. This is an open question. Of course, we're going to agree upon some price, but it still has some intangible number. It's not the price that a consumer pays for some specific product that, for example, includes some addition as some carbon price. No, nothing like that. As for PPP, well, unfortunately, yes, this is a two-way street. Just now I came from the session of Task Force on Climate Sustainability of G20. They brought us some numbers and some reports from the World Bank and Bloomberg agencies. So all of them unanimously announced that the money that they require on developing infrastructure of climate sustainability and resilience is not enough. We're talking about trillions of dollars, not billions, anyway. So of course, private investments is a must. The law number 115 on concessions is into force only being effective in household utilities. In order for it to become effective, it just has to be amended, because it stipulates certain articles that in household utilities we're doing this and so and so. In anything else, in other industries, nobody knows what are we doing. It doesn't mean that we're not going to change anything. If we need, we'll do it, because we developed the law and we can change it and we can reshape it if needs be. So that's briefly the outline of things. I believe that throughout the discussion we will actually mention it once again, I think, more detailedly. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Vladimir, for your input. Well, the next speaker is the representative of Ministry of Natural Resources, Deputy Director of the Department, Larisa Karipanova. Larisa, throughout recent years, your ministry, your institution has made a lot of contribution, first and foremost in the formation of a methodological base and knowledge base of accountability of emissions, but currently we can just state that this system of accountability doesn't work in Russia, so that all companies would be obligated to present their emissions information. We haven't adopted a law just yet for that. It's not a secret that in some way the adoption of this law is not being impeded by somebody. It's just we had some misunderstandings and tiffs with business and the government in regards to standards and norms in presenting information on emissions. And in this regard, what's your opinion? In your mind, is it possible to reach a consensus between a government and a business in regards to all the provisions of providing information of various industries and greenhouse emissions, and establishing the entire full-fledged monitoring and reporting system of emissions? And another bigger question, do we even need to listen to private business? This is a provoking question. Do we need to listen to a business side if the collection of information and providing a transparency of this information and accountability of this information is first and foremost is the responsibility and a headache of our government? Please.
Thank you for that invitation to be part of that discussion. We're just sitting on sharing two chairs now, and this is a symbol. Today, a government has to maneuver between the existing international trend for low-carbon development, and Russia cannot stand aside, and the business position, which is sometimes very controversial, because the business community itself has no unity and no understanding why we need to introduce that low-carbon emissions regulation. So we're trying to just maneuver between those two things. But as a result, I think that due to the opposition from certain business communities, we cannot work out the federal single model for low-carbon economy, and we cannot adopt that federal regulation model. Without those two documents, it will not be possible for us to introduce that bill into the State Duma in next June. I'm hardly thinking that it's going to be done because of that big opposition from the business. However, I think that this is strange. Today, a speaker has, set an example adopted by ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization. This is the case. No matter whether we want it or not, whether we're trying to find efficient or non-efficient ways, the life brings us to the fact that we need to just draft this reporting, monitor greenhouse gases, and also it's going to happen in 2023 when Russian air carriers will have to buy carbon emission credits not in the Russian market and to pay to other carbon credit organizations or other sources where these units are aggregated, and it's not going to be useful either for Russian business nor to consumers, and also to the contrary of the Russian community. We don't want life to bring us either in 2023 or 2025 by export-oriented industries to come to a threshold when they're not allowed to the market, or they will have to pay higher tariffs in the market to export to other countries, because it's not green goods, because it is not in line with carbon regulation, because the country is lacking that regulation system. And this is the so-called carbon protectionism. This is our near perspective. And I'm not sure why business circles are trying to delay this clear carbon emission policy at the federal level. Now we are in the review process of a document, 200 pages, on how a global market system will operate in terms of offsetting aircraft pollution. According to ICAO rules, the country, within 3 months upon submission that document to the country for review, it has to say what are the exclusions in the national regulation. There is no national regulation in Russia, and we have to be bound by that Volume 4, Annex 16 to ICAO Convention. The Ministry for Economic Development, together with the Ministry of Transport, have already introduced that CORSIA method deployment in Russia, so we have to play by someone else's rules. We cannot adopt that law. We cannot adopt national regulations, so we have to oblige to someone else's rules. What can what is the way out today when we need to introduce and help companies to introduce some regulation measures for carbon emissions to have a good image in front of our consumers? There is a clear signal from the government and the Ministry for Economic Development and the Ministry of Natural Resources to prepare a so-called voluntary forest projects document. What does it mean? There is a consensus between authorities. What do those forest projects means? This is a voluntary initiative, a voluntary project that any investor can initiate by having agreed it with a Russian region that has forest resources in its territory. So the agreement should be concluded, money is invested. This is the investment in forestation, planting new trees. There is a report following that activities. That data should be introduced to the Russian National Forest Register, and the national authority responsible for anthropogeneous register keeping should note this data and how much carbon units have been absorbed. This data should also be introduced to the state cadaster. This cadaster is in the open domain according to the International Climate Change Commission, and we will probably give a receipt in a golden frame to an investor that owing to its project delivered in a certain region, so many units have been absorbed of carbon emissions. There are lots of representatives of many companies, and I would like to thank them for that. Rusal, Russian Aluminium Company, who supply to foreign markets. For a company image at external markets, it's important to show that the goods is green, and sometimes when you have to, when you make pollution, you win, and the society wins. And well, if the forest is planted, we are going to breathe fresh air, to say nothing about next generations when they're going just to walk in those voluntarily planted trees. To conclude my message, I want to say that it's going to work in full swing only if those projects are reflected in the federal law. Today, the government has to maneuver among the existing legislation base only because it's a voluntary initiative and there are no additional loads from the business on that. However, if there is a law, if there are rules of the game, projects to reduce carbon emissions, to absorb emissions, it's going to be, done. And those, absorbed carbon units can be an asset for a company. And if we know that the forest starts to absorb not just right from planting, it's going to be a long-term initiative, but only possible if these pollution could be mitigated. We have mentioned the virtual carbon emissions. They're not virtual, I would say. Today, everything has its price, good or bad, and the pollution of carbon emissions have its price, especially monetized. And if we don't reinvent a wheel or a gunpowder, and if we monetize the carbon emissions, and the units of carbon emissions will also get its price, and that will be beneficial for the entire society, not just for the business communities, to make profit, because this is the main idea behind the commercial organization. So they have to feel the zest of investing in such projects. Thank you, Larissa. A few bullet points of yours have been dedicated to business, and let's get to the business side of our discussion. So we are going to talk with you during our Q&A session. Dear colleagues, I would like to use the opportunity to ask Katya, representing Rusnano, just to say a few words. What is happening at Rusnano now in terms of projects delivery for carbon emissions reduction? And what about public-private partnership? What do you think? Thank you, Oleg. The public-private partnership is a mechanism without which neither Rusnano or its subsidiaries cannot deliver on their obligations. Our projects are complex. This is a creation of nano industry in Russia. This is about transfer of technology, creation of breakthrough technology. And without support from state or regions, neither of our projects would have been launched. And our 6 major projects, they demonstrate that private-public partnership is a good thing, and we are urging our partners to do so. It works out well. 83 factories have been built, 15 nano centers, 522 new technology startups emerged. And within today's discussion about climate, I would like just to mention one cluster: renewable energy. Owing to a special contract, owing to a power supply agreement for generating facilities, we're talking about concessions. Owing to that, there is a wind power that started to emerge. There is a wind farm commissioned in region of Ulyanovsk, and we're now producers of wind farm towers, propellers, 100-meter long towers, 65-meter propeller blades. And if we don't have modern materials, it doesn't work out. Therefore, we're working closely with regions, and it's because of the regions those projects have been launched. So basically, the momentum is good. But I want to say that the measures that are taken are not sufficient, because the amount of renewable energy is much higher, given the fact that there is a sharp reduction of new capacities commissioned. But life goes on. I have a legal background, and I would say that every new change, no matter in terms of technology or economics, needs new legislation. We do need urban code changes now, land code changes, federal law on power engineering. We expect to have a new law on carbon emissions, on concessions, as Vladimir has mentioned today. There is a lot of work to do, and the potential is there. And the reduction of pollution is not just about energy security for remote areas, for microgeneration, but this is also a reduction of other things. However, those figures are big. And I would say that Rusnano, we are in favor of the private-public partnership, but we need to move on more actively, and we need new legislation, and we want the state not to turn a blind eye to those new climate projects. So the Ministry of Natural Resources, the Ministry for Economic Development need to be on board to follow the Russian trend, the green Russian trend. Well, the United States of America's opinion is changing with every new president, but the majority of countries follow that trend, and that Mrs. Gribanova has said, we are to resolve those issues. And if we don't make our own rules, we will have to obey someone else's rules. That's Rusnano's attitude to public-private partnership. And in terms of our discussion about the carbon credit, I would like to ask Irina Bakhtina, representing Unilever. Irina, on your website, I saw a carbon credit price. Why? It is amazing because we know that many companies operating in Russia are very cautious about that, but you support that. What makes you think so that it's important for Russia, not less than to the world? Thank you, Irina. I have changed my bullet points because actually, why Unilever, the biggest producer of consumer goods, needs that topic? And I would answer in the following way. Sometime before, maybe 10 years before, we were pretty ambitious in terms of achieving environmental targets and sustainable development. And one of the key goals is to get 100% of energy that we use from renewables by 2030. That policy was taken 10 years ago. Then we revisited that policy last year. The reduction of CO2 emissions across the entire business per ton of produce, if you remember our discussion from April, was reduced by 47%. And if versus 1995, it's 62% reduction. Today, for our operations, we get electricity from grids, from renewables, by 66%. This is about our achievements. What Oleg has mentioned in the very beginning, he has very modest figures. I think 2016 or 17 was meant. Because if we take a look at the World Bank report for 2018, we can see that 70 jurisdictions, national, subnational, or regional, are in favor, and they're pushing forward certain initiatives, pricing, and carbon credits. And China joined that topic last December, and I would say that the topic is there, and China today, even with its energy sector, is the biggest trade emissions carbon credit. They're bigger than the entire European Union by 1.5 times, and nearly 1,500 companies across the globe, they're now switching those parameters in their operations, or going to do that in the coming 2 years. I mean carbon credits or carbon pricing. And the prices, as I can see, they vary from 10 cents to $990. So business can see the logic behind it. Our common goal in Unilever to achieve a certain reduction of emissions, to that level across the year. And if we can see that one unit is not doing a good job, but another unit is doing a good job, and they launch operations with a certain reduction and even higher than expected, there is an idea to redistribute that. So basically what Vladimir was saying, I didn't get it, as I asked my question in a Twitter, how the Ministry for Economic Development, economically, how can they see it, not to have it in the final price? that difference, how can that be offset to those who are lagging behind? It looks like those companies that today are front runners, they reduce emissions, will sell their difference to offset, to compensate for their investments. They will not be able to compete at the market today with those who are lagging behind, and they're not going to the future for some reason. On the other side, they're reducing the entire competitiveness of industries, and Larissa has mentioned that. I think that it's not possible to do it economically only without our consumer to feel the difference in his own pocket. We will not reform upstream if we don't inform downstream. Vitaly has mentioned that pollution of water, waste, and so on. When downstream comes on board, when they understand that they need higher efficiency in the chain starts to move faster and to take measures. And just in the end, speaking about Russian plans and what we do in Russia at Unilever in terms of renewables, what issues we're facing. Ekaterina has mentioned localization. Yes, it has a big impact on today's operations in general. I mean, wind farm energy deployment. We're now working on an agreement. One side of that agreement is Fortum Generation Company, and for their wind farms, they also work with Ulyanovsk for blades. Nizhny Novgorod provides nacelles for those wind farms. So it's a big competitive edge, new technologies, localization to a wider scale. So basically the plan with that project to have a western part of Russia. We have 3 production facilities: St. Petersburg, Tula, and I forgot the third name.
Yeah, because I was focusing on the negative things. I meant Tomsk, because we couldn't make a transition after Ural Mountains. So we make a transition of these industries, and basically 100% of the energy that we're going to consume over there will be produced from the stock market. It will be certified from turbine parks. Why can't we do this in the far east of Russia? Because it's another zone where our experts say, and we've been working on this for quite a while, that nobody can actually enter this bulk market. So what is the complexity of this? We actually spoke about this on April with our colleagues. It will be more expensive to install these wind turbines. And when we made an estimation of economic case, this figure of 1.7% higher wasn't actually high, because initially it was 6% and 5%, and so we brought it down to 1.7. But again, coming back to the issue that I replied to Vladimir, so how should we compensate this, or to demonstrate our end customer, because it will be reflected in our price. This will be reflected in the final price of our product, and the consumer has to give us a credit that this is a more eco-friendly product, it is more high quality product made from the renewable energy sources, and so on and so forth. So here we would like to understand how exactly we're going to even out the situation by use of economic metrics and measures. So that's the only thing. As soon as I remember the third facility, I'll come back to you. So you posed a question for the Department of the Ministry of Economic Development. So, Vladimir, I think that as soon as the Q&A session will commence, I think your question will be the first one to be answered. Dear colleagues, we are moving along with our program. Vsevolod Gavrilov, Director of the Directorate for Project Management in the field of energy saving and nature management of Sberbank of Russia, and I would like you to kickstart your monologue with the said question. Our session is dedicated to PPP. So, Mr. Gavrilov, You stand at the very onset of the climatic partnership between private sector and public sector. And with the help of PPP, within the framework of the previous climatic agreement, Kyoto Treaty, with the efforts of Sberbank of Russia and some governmental institutions and private parties as well, you've managed to unleash the potential in cutting greenhouse emissions. So, with the help of Sberbank of Russia, with the coordination of private structures, we've prepared more than 100 projects of joint use in the oil industry, metallurgy, and other sectors as well. But what is more important, I think, is that with the help of Sberbank and the government and their cooperation, you've done lots of capacity building. You've developed a very good knowledge base, practical base. You've trained high-quality experts, at least several hundreds. I think 300 or 400 set experts. Very high quality specialists. I'm not talking about other people that you've also trained. They were prepared for the implementation of this project activity. Here's a question. Do you see, due to the Paris Accord coming into force and the obligations that were undertaken by the government of Russia on developing a legislation and regulation of greenhouse emissions control, do you see any opportunities or prospects for reinvigorating said cooperation, and what can be the relations of that? Thank you. Thank you. Well, you gave me such a nice introduction. You know, it's like saying a prayer before you are, entering your golden period. Dear colleagues, thank you very much for coming. I would like to deeply thank the Ministry of Natural Resources and Ministry of Economic Development of Russia for convening this session. Dear friends, those of you among the audience, there are lots of clients of our company, Sberbank of Russia. Maybe you are a shareholder, or just a member of the market with our stocks. Our motto, as you know, we are by your side. And we are on your side as well. So I will try to dwell upon this issue, but I'm not over here. I'm among you. I will try to speak on your behalf. I will try to speak about what you think, because we know a lot about you. We know all your purchases. We analyze it, and with the use of big data, we try to guess your mood and your attitude. So, I would start that just recently, this summer, we've had a quite serious forum dedicated of city agglomerations, where a discussion was sparked between our Moscow mayor, Sergei Sobyanin, and Mr. Kudrin, our economic advisor, who was actually my mentor. So Kudrin posed him a question. Sergei Sobyanin, is it happening that Moscow, given its development rate and absolutely outrageous development and investment program, is actually siphoning resources from other points of Russia, and by this weakening the development of Russia? And you know the answer of our mayor. He said, look, Mr. Kudrin, of course, we are focusing on immense invest capacity, but we are competing not with other cities here. We are on the scale of global competition. We don't compete with Russian cities. We compete with other agglomerations, with the Silicon Valley in California state. We compete with the state of New York, with Berlin, with Tokyo. And based on how we're going to establish our system, interconnected system of sustainable development of our capital, this will indicate our winning side or losing side in this battle. This is the simple message that I would like to start my presentation with. Maybe you are the visitors to our city, maybe you are a local resident. Please notice how the urban environment is starting to change, how more friendly it became, because, the climate, agglomerations, they are very closely connected things. And what we really need to focus upon when developing these projects of city agglomeration by diminishing the influence on climate, and if we cannot handle it, or some other actors are still, changing it, we have to adapt to those changes. And again, I want to express my gratitude to the Department of Ministry of Natural Resources that you pay great attention to this. They actually organize this. We are a consumer of their knowledge. And Irina posed the question, are we ready to actually pay for this? Are we ready, for example, by entering eBay, Ozone, Alibaba, to choose more expensive product and click to put it in the basket? But we chose it to be more expensive but eco-friendly, or we choose a cheaper option that is not eco-friendly. Here's a question, because we have to come to a consensus of our cooperation between you and us, between the consumers and the producers. So, Larisa Karipalova and Vladimir, we are very good partners, and we were trying to strike a balance between this, the balance between reasonable attitude, conscious behavior, and consumption. You know, if you open up our agenda right now, it will have the clinch that Mr. Pluzhnikov is discussing. Is it going to be about partnership or about regulation? What is a partnership? So you have your friends, you have your partners. It means mutual responsibilities, a system of goal setting, a system of trustworthy relationships. That's one path. That's on one hand, as they say. What do we have on the other hand? On the other hand, we have an enforceability system, a limitation system, a coercion system, a punishment system, a penalty system for violating these norms and standards. So, now let's think. From the point of view of climate, what point between these two scenarios would be the most beneficial path? Because somebody has to come that we all have to, oblige, otherwise you face a penalty. Or let's just start discussing. In life you can't find black or white. It's all just shades of gray in our life. So the question is, light gray or dark gray is our path? If you ask us, and we are actually you, us, we are your money, we are your trust, we are your security and safety. And if you ask us what path do we have to choose, I would say that partnership is more beneficial. Because even if we talk money-wise, what do money like? They like low risks, predictability, forecasts, and clarity. Mutual understanding of all parties of what has to be done. Which is why partnerships, quite possibly, is the best way to do this. And we are doomed for partnership. I would use the word doomed here. How do we find it? My colleague, Ms. Karipanova, said a very interesting thing, that if you choose partnership, you have to play by the rules. And quite possibly, it's true that, yes, we do need some rules. But these relations within these rules, they have to be established on the mutual trust and mutual responsibility. Let's talk about future now. We are entering the era of new political cycle, a cycle when our country has to really change its content, quality-wise, its economic qualities, to have more reinforcing qualities, sustainable qualities. Are we going to take into account climatic factors while doing so? Indubitably, yes. Us, Sberbank, again, Sberbank is you, colleagues. You shape our politics, our way of doing things. And of course, right now, we would like to propose. We've already proposed to the government of Russian Federation a partnership on a set of cooperational ways in regards to climate change and climate resilience and climate adaptability. Right now, they don't take the cake. They're not like at the top of the agenda, but sometime, sooner or later, the integration will happen. So I'd like to conclude with the following words. Based on how you, the audience, not us, sitting at the panel, you maybe through our efforts or through our companies, you will formulate these goals and objectives. And that will happen in this way. Be more proactive. For Christ's sake, be more proactive. A lenient approach is the worst thing possible. You cannot be complacent. And when this proactivity will reach its the end of all the channels of efforts, I hope that your decision that you've made will be justified. And when you're going to click, coming back to eBay or Alibaba issue that you're going to choose, you will make a decision, right or wrong, and the business will be your partner. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gavrilov. That is a very sensible subject, and I think Irina would like to make a small comment on your speech. We will come back to that a little bit later. Now we are continuing our discussion. I would like to refer to the experience of Kazakhstan that has already shaped its national emissions regulation system already, and they have an established knowledge base. I know for a fact that it's not all peaches and creams. There are, of course, some challenges, some problems, and interactions with businesses not always go smoothly. So, I would like to give the floor to the chairman of Association of Environmental Organizations of Kazakhstan, Aygul Solovyova. Please, Ms. Solovyova, could you briefly explain what are those challenges that you faced? And what is the role of your environmental organizations in overcoming these challenges? For Russia, we are actually adopting your practices, so I'm very interested in your response. Thank you very much. Of course, I will mention that experience, and by your request, I made this slide in my presentation to show you this. But first and foremost, I would like to welcome everybody that came and express my gratitude to the government of City of Moscow, and thank the wonderful organizers for inviting us here for this forum so that we have an opportunity to express ourselves and give presentations. Of course, there is some temptation that we want to talk about what is being done in Kazakhstan. So my first slide will be dedicated to just that. It demonstrates that there are some global initiatives, there are national Kazakhstan initiatives, and they are already integrated because we're working in one playing field. Of course, we are trying to adapt all global practices of various dozens of countries. And this slide, you've made a reference to Paris Accords and Kyoto agreements. We gave a reference to them as well, so to show you that we know that Kazakhstan joined and ratified, I think, in November 2016, as far as back as 2 years ago. And of course, we adopted several obligations, and we're moving along nicely in complying with them. The only thing is, I do agree that there will be some process of restrictions and thresholds, and this COP climate change conference will, of course, establish new limitations for business that, of course, affect external markets. Moreover, there's a process of divesting that, international and global financial institutes are actually delist these dirty players from the exchange, and they don't even provide them with any financial options in the future. So we also realize in Kazakhstan that there are some risks and preoccupations, and of course we're moving along in the process of diminishing said risks. You posed the question that we are actually NGO, and the main message was how the business and the government are actually interacting among each other. We are the organization that basically plays the role of a mediator, a middleman between just the public, general public that lives in Kazakhstan, that of course would like to live in a good environment, but also would like to work in good and respectable working places. So finding a balance between that is very important. So we're trying to rally both government and private sector so that we could jointly move along and develop ourselves further and further. So you asked us about what experience do we have. As far back as in 2011, we are starting adopting this emissions limitation system via adopting several laws in governmental regulations in the subject of greenhouse emissions limitations for the establishing a national system of market of emission limitations trade. And indubitably, in 2011, it was just a pilot project. But by 2012, it already started up and running, and we also adopted the Institute of Verifications of Emissions. And only in 2013, I guess, it started to, well, comprehensively its work, because we now had our knowledge base, we could now get to verify things, and this process went along quite nicely. But what do we have as a result of that? So we started from the fact that when we first initiated the system on Kaspi exchange, and about 57 companies took part in that. We've made 78 deals on the sum of about $5 million. And the average price for 1 unit of quota in 2014 was 1.41 US dollar, but in 2015 it was 3.25 US dollars. Throughout that time, of course, there were some fluctuations from $5 to $9. So right after that, when we take a look of the system is, well, working as expected, we also made an intermission, and starting from 2017 we reinitiated the work of this platform. And I would like to mention that basically when this only works on the internal market, it's not always, very long-term and prominent. So that's why we're cooperating with China, which is about to also adopt several laws. I think that Russia is still deliberating on that, but you can enter our market as you please and take part, because I believe it will work with your help, more fluently, and it of course will stimulate this mechanism to be at least implemented on a pilot basis in your country. So I also would like to say a couple of words about the fact that we as association, we are also working on the track of low carbon development, not only on the central level, but we're working on the nationwide, and starting from the Almaty and Astana, this is our capital. We've developed a comprehensive plan by 2020 where we clearly explain each step of the way, and as association we monitor the processes that are happening. So we estimated, we set as an indicator of what our starting point and our final point of the strategy of our low carbon development. Currently, among 70 regions, 10 of those have already are participants of this strategy. And of course, this is the task of our organization. Because yesterday on one of the platforms, when we talk about public engagement, we said that there are a lot of populist and maybe not very objective actions. And we, as an organization that collects all the information, we have more than 90 environmental organizations under our aegis. And we're, of course, trying to debate on our platform and then convey our consolidated message to the government. So this next slide is what is done now. We are reviewing our climate code, and we're discussing how much the perpetrator and the polluter has to pay. We're working on that as well, and we believe that we will very closely cooperate with the Russian Federation on this track, because you as well have very good practices on reference documents and indexes and registries and mechanisms on that regard, and we will work together. I will not stop on that, but we've tried to accommodate and implement entire global practice that has been implemented on OECD member states. And the last slide, I just wanted to remind you that we've developed an International Center of Green Technologies that acts as a tool and a mechanism at the same time that allows us to implement BATs that will work with both China and other countries as well. And I know that September this month, our president is coming there, and yours as well. So also we will have a group that are Nobel awardees. He is our chairman of the Presidium of Association of Environmental Organizations, and we will hold a presentation of our project that's called Supergrid that we are implementing with China and other Asian Pacific region countries. You know, here I just wanted to, give you references of tools and leverages of how we work with business. We work with Russian agencies, international agencies. Of course, there are always better practices, and we're trying to reach 100% transparency, but still some companies are resisting, but public opinion plays a huge role in that regard. And aside from all that, I've already mentioned the mechanisms of best available techniques and practices. It will be a very good instrument, especially when working with business. We've discussed this numerous times in our platforms. Nobody is scared of using this toolkit, and we are ready to actually nationally implement this in our national code. We would like to, it was mentioned on the incentives and stimulations, we want that we have payments, and in our tax code we want to understand what is the payment and the fee, and when it has to be accumulated, and what from this fee we can incentivize to the industry that is actually implementing best available practices.
We know a Czech experience up to 60% compensation for the business, and we are following the same way. And basically, the international center that I have mentioned has been working actively, and I do invite you there, because there will be a lot of interesting mechanisms to be interesting for you, for Russians. And you asked your question today about private-public partnership, and there is a pilot project on that in the municipal infrastructure sector, and there are so-called green subsidies. So if 10% is a loan taken from the bank, if it's green technology, they are incentivized. And apart from that, there is an international center for green technologies using English law, and I think that Kazakhstan in the near future will go in a faster pace towards compliance with the Kazakhstan's obligations as a country. Thank you, Aygul. It's been very interesting and useful to listen to you. Well, colleagues, let's move on. The next speaker is by Alexei Spirin, section head of Rusal United Company. But Alexei, before we start, may I have a question? Rusal, just before the Paris Climate Conference, had initiated a climate partnership, an organization to foster ratification of the Paris Accord by Russian Federation to set up a full scale of carbon emission system, monitoring system, for Russia's cooperation to reduce negative impact on the climate system, to increase energy efficiency, development of renewable energy, and so on. What makes you think that this position should be beneficial for Russia, and what are the ways of cooperation between the state and commercial companies? Thank you. In my presentation, I would like to answer your question, because this is the topic that I want to talk about. First of all, I would like to attract your attention to the fact that Russia is part and parcel of the world economy. We are integrated into the world economy, and it's very important to watch the trends that are taking place in the world. A good example from the previous 10 years of age, Apple has offered us a smartphone, and not all smartphone producers were able to get adapted to that. And there are not so many companies who were able to see that and develop on, but those who could embark on that journey, they're feeling good now. And the world trend now, whether we do it or not, is green movement. A few words about the root causes, why it happens. I do remember when I was at school, our teachers told us about that in the previous century, the scientists have concluded that fossil fuels are finite. And what happens next? When it's over, all conflicts are now waged to possess resources. Who can be interested? Everyone wants to live a normal life, to have a good future, a reliable future. So the project was launched to stay away from that dependency of fossil fuels. And also, it's a good thing that there is a scientific base, that climate has changed because of the human impact. Sometimes in the media we can see that it's a fake news. Don't believe that the man-made impact on the climate is so big. We can believe it or not, but we need to believe in the first thing, because it's inevitable. And this trend will be there whether we want it or not. Anyway, staying away from fossil fuel usage is going to happen. We need to know that. We need to move in that direction, and we need to get ready for that. And just a few words about many foreign companies' experience. Rusal is part of an international coalition of leaders for green carbon, and this organization has quite a lot of think tanks, like Total, Shell are also part of that initiative. And I want to just attract attention to those companies, because I asked them, why do you need this? You're just digging a hole for yourself. You, oil companies, oil and gas companies, why do you need that? But the answer was simple. They said, forget oil and gas. We are energy companies, first of all. We have been there for 100 years, and we do want to continue. We know that the hydrocarbon age will be over, and to keep our business safe, we need to understand what to do next. This is renewables. Total is maybe the biggest investor in solar energy. Shell has been investing into hydrogen fuel. But what about Russian oil and gas majors? What priorities do they have? What do they do in this direction? And I don't know. The question about a long-term vision, well, I say yes. For Russia, there should be a priority. Yes. Today, a great deal of the national economy depends on hydrocarbon exports. Should we invest or not in that area is a question for the state, because the experts say that consumption will decrease, the price will decrease, and this source of energy will decrease. And we as a company who want to see strategic developments, to see what's going to happen in the future going forward, We do realize that, and we know that, our message to the state is that we have to stay away from that economic model and to switch to high-tech economies earmarked for not for commodities sales, but for ready-made technology-based solutions, including renewables. And we do have this potential. What is visible in terms of relations between a business community and the state? There should be a partnership. A partnership, as has been mentioned today, there should be a dialogue. Yes, of course, but there are some tough measures, and I would like to challenge that. The dialogue should be there. It should be beneficial for the business to do this type of thing, to move towards low emission, low carbon economy. And the partnership should foster that. How to get it done in the safest and in the most beneficial way. Not to harm business. Not to harm. There should be carrots, of course, in an ideal model, but there should be a stick as well. Otherwise, no one can be held responsible, and there is a wish to spend money to get nothing instead. There should be some harmony, and those companies who have been actively doing that, I mean carbon footprint reduction and all that stuff, they're moving towards low emission technologies, and they don't feel that they don't have to feel the difference. The model should be shaped like that for them to work as they work, and the biggest burden should be placed on those who don't want to do that. And of course, there is a demand for attention, for discussion, how to get it done in such a way and to find proper, ways how to get it done in the best way. So it takes a dialogue, it takes partnership between the state and the business. What else do I want to say? Back in 2015, before the Paris conference, we initiated the Russian Climate Partnership. Now it has 20 companies, but we want to have more firms on board, and we want to work out with the government to continue developing measures or tools, highly efficient instruments for our state to move from high emission to low emission green economy. Thank you. Sometime before we had a chance to learn the experience of Kazakhstan, and I would like to ask our UK comrades, Adam Smith from Verco. First of all, welcome to Russia. I want you to feel good in this country, but the question will probably not be as comfortable as this welcome. Can you tell us why business in the United Kingdom is not opposing so much and is in support of the government actions towards the climate policy? Where is that magic button that you're using? Is this internal agreements, lobby talks, or business communities are interested? Can you tell us about that? Because we're trying hard to find these, things on how to get it done in this country.
Spasiba. Just before I answer your question, just to say thank you to the organisers for inviting me here today. It's been a really great discussion so far this morning, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the day. And it's my hope that we can all take one or two interesting ideas and thoughts back with us to our respective companies and organisations and to continue that discussion after today with our friends and colleagues. I think it's a really good question. I mean, so we heard yesterday from Jonathan Perks from Ricardo, and he made a really interesting point that the UK has been trying various different forms of policy over the last 20, 25 years in many forms, in the form of tax, in the form of incentives, in the form of sort of hybrid schemes. And while they haven't always got it perfectly right, and it hasn't always been peaches and cream, like you say, there's strong evidence that the government have listened throughout those years, and they've entered into dialogue in various different ways with businesses. And I think that's been the fact that's been going on for such a long period of time has created this good environment for these things to start happening. I think the legacy of that is that we have a low carbon sector in the UK which is growing 4 times as quickly as the economy as a whole. It employs roughly 1 in 50 people in the UK, and it produces well-paid, highly skilled and well-distributed jobs. So we're seeing the fruits of that investment already. And all of those figures come from a study conducted by our business ministry about 3 years ago. And we've also seen, as Jonathan mentioned, this decoupling of GDP and of decarbonisation. And I think that proves that you can become cleaner and richer at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive at all. And in fact, in many ways, they can be mutually supportive. And so we're learning all the time about new ways in which that's true. I think there are other factors as well. For the last 8 years, we've had a governing party who are very business friendly, so I think that's probably contributed as well. We have a highly service-driven economy, and I think that provides a good environment for the low-carbon sector, which is often based around services. That's my job. I'm a consultant in low-carbon services. And I think also we have the advantage of the fact that there's strong public support for a lot of these policies. Last year or the year before, there was a documentary series in the UK which looked at the problem of ocean plastics, and within weeks, within months of that documentary airing, you had huge public response to the problems that were mentioned there. And the government immediately started all these projects and initiatives and making these statements to try and resolve those issues, in a very short period of time. So I think all of those things have created this sort of environment where, in fact, it's actually, at the moment, it's businesses in a lot of cases who are actually pushing government and lobbying them to make the changes. So in fact, it's almost like the leading businesses, they're the ones pushing the sort of the frontier. They're the best in practice. And it's the government's responsibility to almost maintain the minimum standards for everyone else to comply with. Businesses, what they need is they need information and they need investor confidence. And for that to work, they need a long-term target. So in the UK, we have the Climate Change Act, which sets a mandated, legally binding commitment to decarbonise by 80% by the year 2050. And then along the journey, businesses need to see points along leading up to that main long-term target, to give them the confidence to make what can be very big allocations of capital. It's not cheap to buy electric vehicles. It's not, at this point in time, it's not cheap to completely change industrial processes, but it gets much easier to access the capital to do those things if the government are committing and making those sort of long-term promises to businesses.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. Спасибо большое. Мы просто...
Thank you very much. We were talking to Oleg Borisovich. Should we start a Q&A session now? So we decided to end up with the main speakers first, and then we'll get back to you with the questions, because many things have been touched upon, and I think there will be a lot of questions, and we want to attract very shortly the audience into that discussion, but later. Oleg. Are you finished, Adam, or would you like to continue? Okay, I got it. Thanks. The next speaker is Maxim Titov, Executive Director of Enerpo Research Center of European University of St. Petersburg. Maxim, first of all, you're a successful bidder. Our congratulations, because we have been tracking those developments taking place around your university. However, before the university position, you used to work a lot at IFC, and you were engaged in an active deployment of a business project reduced to carbon emissions. Therefore, you know the problem from all aspects. But if we take a look at the problem of interaction between the business and the state from an onlooker, from the scientific academic perspective, can you tell us briefly your vision? How do you see the role of the Russian business in the deployment of that climate policy? Thank you for good words. It's a pleasure to be here, because our European University's Research Center is dealing with the climate change and sustainable development, and we think that our role is a third party, especially in the northwest of Russia. We analyze the practice of Russian enterprises. Since 2003, I had worked at the World Bank Group to introduce energy efficiency projects back in 2003, 2006. Nobody was talking about energy efficiency, I would say. And I have encountered smaller and medium businesses. And just a few words about our babies, no offense meant. What drivers are to be engaged in those climate projects on the side of a company owner who is, upgrading the boiler plant in Leningrad region. He needs to win a competitive bid. He needs to show that he has got funding. But he will get this money from municipal authorities later, but he has to do the job now. And he needs a standard financial proposal together with a standard technology-based solution. And then he's a successful bidder, and he builds a boiler plant for 2,000 inhabitants of that settlement. And what will be the impact on the climate? Those people, they fired gas or coal. They fired firewood or coal, but they will switch to gas. How many such settlements are scattered across this country? How many smaller entrepreneurs are like that in this country? They don't have a chance to visit such fora. They don't know about them, especially in remote areas. How much they really do now, we don't know. And they're sometimes forgotten. What are the drivers? The regulator wants that. An investor or CEO needs that. Or my customer needs that. A pharmaceutical company in St. Pete, a CEO would have told me that we would have never done that if we don't have a contractual agreement with a major pharmaceutical company. That's why we're doing those certifications, and therefore we're doing all that. And if there is a carbon certification scheme, we have to comply, because this is our expert opportunity. Yes, we do want to frighten companies who have an expert potential. We want to warn them that there will be that regulation, but we need to offer something instead. The international financial institutions working in Russia, not only Russia, in terms of financial products today, the green there will be a commercial bank today at our green financing panel, that has launched small and medium business loans for energy efficiency. And once launched that lending, they started getting statistics for greenhouse gases. However, no one except IFC or World Bank has demanded that. And so if a private bank wants to go to financial markets internationally, they could say, all right, I have funded $14 billion worth of, companies, and I can do a good job. But sometimes there is a public sector where private companies cannot do well. It's all about kindergartens, it's hospitals, and there are very interesting examples delivered in Russia. In Arkhangelsk region, there was a very good revolver funds, but what's happening now? The budget legislation is changing. The municipal authority leader changes, and I'm trying to find this revolver fund. It's not there. Only a few consultants are there, but the results look very nice. They have spent a certain amount of money for an upgrade of a school, actual reduction of energy consumption by 34%. This economy is visible in the budget. It gets back to the energy efficiency fund to finance the next facility. And that concept exists in many countries. But the Russian development institutions should have poached that experience in a good way to customize to Russian specifics, because there have been a few attempts, a few development institutions, they wanted to do that, but so far no, specimen proposals, especially for SMEs. Bigger companies that the panels that I moderated yesterday, there are many major companies having dedicated units for green economy. So you are the change agents. You communicate that information to your consumers, vendors. So you have to share that experience, helping out smaller companies in Russia to introduce new technologies. And this is a good thing. And as far as the role of a megapolis, a role of this thing for municipal authorities, this forum is hard to overestimate in Moscow, because Moscow sets a high benchmark. I'm not sure whether many Russian cities will be able to do the same as Moscow does, but they will see it. They will see the momentum, the direction, where the practice goes, what Moscow is doing, and what we have to strive for. Yes, our budget is smaller, but those issues are important to us as well. That's what I wanted to say. Well, there is a final presentation by the head of the Russian Union of Entrepreneurs and Industrialists Group, Mikhail Yulkin. He is a veteran of the Russian climate movement. You know him. Mikhail, can you answer my question? From the Polish conference, we expect certain framework rules according to the Paris Accord. All countries have, except the United States, for certain specifics. It's because of the personality. Russia, as we know, is waiting. And I do recall a Soviet animated cartoon, a flying ship, where one character was saying, I'm going to make a ship, and the second is saying, I will buy it. So there is a feeling that we're waiting and then we're going to buy something. What do you think yourself? Do you see any risks for business in this area, especially for companies listed outside of Russia? Or does it make sense to wait for things to settle down, for people to gain some experience, and then we will have to be based on their errors and trials and to have a well-balanced approach? What do you think? Well, I don't like the case that we have to wait and hope, because proactiveness is much better for taking good solutions or decisions. I don't expect any breakthroughs from Katowice, maybe technical, because the rest being adopted in 2015, 2016, they came into force, so when they were ratified. As far as Russia, we have to take a cautious approach. Somebody has mentioned the thing that there is green produce, but it's more expensive. And there are non-green but cheap. What is cheap? The global damage last year from everything was $390 billion, and this is always a price for carbon emissions that we had to pay for that. 138 billions were insured, and the rest 260 were paid out from our pockets. So this is the price that we have to pay by buying cheap products, dirty products. If we open a report for global risks regularly published by the International Economic Forum, the second place in terms of hazardous are climate changes, and they, by probability of occurrence, they take the first place. So the world public opinion agreed that the climate change is a big risk, but this is a man-made risk, and now we have to assess it, and we have to spread those costs. And this is as far as price is concerned. Of course, if there is regulation and there is a price for carbon emissions, those who emit, he has to pay for that, not us, every one of us. So there is a chance either to choose for that project, an expensive one, or not to opt for that, because something can be cheaper. So it's not just a choice, I buy a green, expensive, or dirty and cheap. No, I buy a dirty, expensive, or cheap and green. That would be the right solution. Now, about risks and opportunities. It's easy to see that the information about the Russian experts is open, except some military line items, but we're not boasting. We're boasting our oil exports. If we take a look at the previous year's statistics, how much we have exported commodities, fossil fuels and natural gas, and we turn it into CO2 equivalent, it's 2 billion tons per year. So we supply that produce to those countries who are parties to the Paris Accord and who are trying to stay away from those carbon footprint. And this 2 billion related to our fields, they have it in their budgets. So potentially they don't have these experts sooner or later, because what is the area? The goals of the Paris Accord is zero waste following 2050, and those 2 billion ton worth of our exports will be a burden for them. They will trying to stay away from that. Is it little or much in terms of exports? All right, Russia exports 46% of crude oil and 25 more as processed oil. So it's 70% of crude that we export.
So we got 2/3. So what is left? We export about 45 of all oil that is being produced. So about half. It's not going to happen in the next 10 years. So what is going to happen with Kuzbas, with Kemerovo, or others deposits? So what are we going to lose on the internal market if we lose about 50% of all production? We export about 30% of our liquefied natural gas. So of course gas will have a longer lifespan because, as fuel it is the least pollutant one. I wouldn't call it eco-friendly, of course, but it is the least pollutant one, and it has some life cycle ahead of it. So for example, if we look at the natural gas as a transitional type of fuel, it doesn't make no sense anymore, because energy sources are so cheap right now that gas as is even if seen as a transitionary fuel type, is useless. For example, take a look at Germany. They are both dependent from coal and nuclear energy. This is difficult scheme because really this is a very tough managerial hypo. It is very costly. So at the same time, they are dependent on gas, nuclear energy, and even coal. It's just a strategical approach on, increasing consumption of gas or decreasing. So it has to be balanced out. What can we get as a result? It is tough to imagine, living energy chain only from, for example, one type of fuel. Maybe in order to diminish peak loads, we will, for example, provide fuel types for these reserve capacities. I don't think so. One thing is when our primary fuel source is our main expert, or when you provide the fuel just in case. This is a different type of fuel. It is a gas, but it bears a different strategic significance, and its image is different as well. I don't think that Russia can handle the role of the provider of said fuel to Europe. But if we agree on this trend, then of course we can only provide one type of fuel. And I talked to Igor Poroshenkov yesterday, and he said, and I absolutely agree, that if by 2050 we need to increase GDP twofold, we need to build another economy of Russia, basically. And how is it going to look like? Is it going to be the same, or is it going to be different? We don't need the same type of economy because there isn't much demand on the external market for our economy. So we need to think about other things. And in regards to partnership, business is very different, of course, based on the industry. For example, if you recall Barack Obama, who tried to, gather all the experts from the Silicon Valley, and he tried to negotiate with them. It, of course, allowed him to, make some presidential decrees with some sort of influence on them. So, for example, Microsoft, Amazon, they are all included. But for example, if we talk about coal producers, those are old-timers. I think it's a losing strategy if we're going to, rally them up, because coal cannot handle any sort of competition. Even in America, it cannot handle a candle anymore to solar energy or wind energy, because, solar energy is becoming cheaper and more accessible. Based on the statistics for the first quarter of 2018 on the production, 95% is favorable by solar and wind in America. 95% of all investments are going in renewable energies. So not a single new gas pumps has been built, but they built a lot of new solar panels. So it's new economy, green economy. So this is the issue that we are talking about. For the last decade, actually, if we have a set goal and we need to, curb our increase of temperature, it means zero emissions sooner or later. But what are we going to provide for the market? Where is the niche? Where is that economic niche that can provide market with the products that can be done and made and exploited from Russia? So this regulation should answer this question. You should base your judgments on strategic vision, because business in Russia right now, we can only think about in 6 years or period of time, but we have to think about the categories of 25 or 50 years from now on. Business can be seen in such a long time. This is, of course, the preoccupation of the government. It's their task to do. So you have to figure out what is going to be the locomotives of our industry in the next 25 years. So this is just a burden that we're wasting more money on, and not just us. If we just look at the subsidies or investments on the maintenance of traditional sources of energy, this is $5 trillion currently that we actually talked about. $5 trillion per year. This is how much it costs us to switch on the low carbon path. And this is what we spend on support of traditional fossil fuels. Maybe we should find more meaning for this money. We shouldn't even, divest. And diverting this money on news industries. Because, regulations is not just a fiscal mechanism. This is, as we see in the Paris Agreement, they have to also comply with all the objectives of curbing the temperature growth. So the mechanism of regulation, this is the means of diverting these straits in the right path. So this is what we should focus on when talking to business. For example, when we had the talks in Kemerovo city on increasing the export of coal, and the president is tasked with the issues of organizing these straits of entire train cars of coal, I don't think that's correct way to do business, because it's old-timers production, old-timers industry, previous age, I would say. Maybe it's the era of Soviet Union, but Soviet Union didn't get far on coal economy, so we don't want to repeat the same mistakes. Coal economy, it's not a modern term. It's not 21st century style. 21st century style is green economy, energy efficiency, energy saving, digitalization. It's smart grids. This is what I'm talking about. This is what should be done. Because all the platforms, all the infrastructure that we have built now, they were built only, in the first half of the 20th century. Of course, they can't compete with the technologies of 21st century. But does that mean that we have to maintain them still? I don't think so. So that's why we are actively redistributing these new grids, smart grids. It works as neural nets. This is the task that should be focused our attention on. And instead we make decisions on DPM2 or something it's called like this. Digitalizations of our energy industry on the same resources. For example, old coal station is being substituted with a new coal station. Why? Why bother with another coal installation? I'm about to wrap up, but I'll just give you several examples. Polymetal company, it's an example, provides energy with its mines with, for example, wind turbines. Lukoil company built a solar power plant to power its mines. These are examples how we should do it. Of course, they didn't build them themselves. They engaged a Havel company to do their bidding. So that's what Irina mentioned today. Industries in Europe are focusing and switching more and more on wind energy sources, when modern products are being accompanied with modern energy sources. This should be the target of Russian economy. I'm sorry for taking too much of your time. Yes, I also looked at the example of Kemerovo, and 65% of China and Asia-Pacific countries are trying to curb their consumption of coal. Where Russia is trying to divert all its new coal, I have no idea. Thank you, Michael. Again, that was very interesting. I'm very heartening that you mentioned our portfolio companies of Rosnano, and it shows that we are working in the right path, in the necessary environment that are reshaping the future. So today we have heard a recommendation or a suggestion of this magical leverage. Mr. Smith said that in the UK, public opinion really supports this climate issue, and this opinion, it is becoming, the bread and butter. So I would like to ask you to also have a very simple vote by just raising your hands. We would just calculate the tendencies and trends, how the audience reacts on these pressing issues related to costs. Who should be tasked with that, and whose responsibility should it be, and how to make it more convenient for everybody, as colleagues from European Institute and Rusal said that we would have win-win situation. Oleg, could you formulate a question that we'd like to pose for the audience? Dear colleagues, we would like to make a small interactive vote for you by just you raising your hands. So Vladimir said in his presentation that in the nearest future we don't adapt these emission taxes. Now, we'd like to know about your opinion. We would have two stages of vote. Very short and simple. First question: do you believe that it is necessary to implement in the Russian Federation carbon price, so that we have to pay for carbon just as we pay for emissions of pollutants? I'm not talking about specific numbers or mechanisms, just in general. Do you believe that it is feasible? Those in favor, show hands, please. Well, that's about 90 to 95%. Okay, let's say 85 to 90%. They are in favor. Yes, I agree. I was actually surprised that Larisa didn't raise hands. Yeah, well, officials do not participate in the voting. Yeah, that I understand. Okay, who believes that there is no need in adopting this in the nearest future? Show hands. About 3%, maybe 5% tops. Very well. Well, this is actually the very good result of the vote, because we have a split opinion. Okay, Q&A will follow. Now the second question of our vote: do you believe that costs and expenditures related to the transition on low carbon economy, or how is it mentioned in Paris Agreement, to entering low emission trajectory of development, must be, responsibility of the society itself, or it should be implemented or in a notion that the polluter pays? No, those are two questions. Okay. First question: should the society be responsible? How are we going to vote? No. First question is: should the society, so you and I, be responsible for that, or the principle is that polluter pays tax emissions for polluting the environment? So the first question is: are we ready to? The audience, is the audience ready to pay more money right now? Although I do agree with Michael's idea that it would be, more expensive, but still more polluting. But maybe the money that we pay now, it will play part in adaptation or for diminishing consequences. But if we talk about the systems of regulation, we pay either right now or in the future. So are we ready, the audience, to pay, or should the polluters pay? So, show hands those of you that are ready to pay extra money to pay more money for just conserving. Well, not a lot of people actually. So, if you, for example, go to a shopping center and you choose between two products, the product A was made by a company that complies with all the principles on low carbon development. So this product A is eco-friendly, made by renewable energy, but this product costs more, objectively. No, that's incorrect. We're talking about should. No. That's the second question. No. We're talking about the other question. No, right now we're talking that. I'm sorry. We'd like to. I don't want to see what is being driven by new clutches. No, I think that the audience understood the question, and not a lot of people have actually voted that they are ready to pay more money just to buy eco-friendly products. Okay, Should the polluter pay for the polluting? Show hands. Sorry, the speaker doesn't speak on the mic. Okay, very well, thank you. Dear colleagues, I think we have about 10 minutes for Q&A session. Let's try to go from left to right. I see one person. Please introduce yourself. Sorry, the speaker doesn't speak into the mic. Hello, my name is Anatoly from the movement of eco-friendliness. So you said that polluters should pay, but practically speaking, in Russia we are living on a principle that not the polluter pays, but the society and business actually pays for the polluter. I'll give you an example. Not just, paying, but it actually leads to the bankruptcy of our funds. For example, we have a reform in our pension. We will have to work up to 65 or 67 years old if you're a man. Here's my question. Why a pension system actually reached this lowest threshold? It is actually, the lowest age, the highest actually age of entering a pension age. We have about 30 to 40% are elderly people, and 10% of us are entering pension age preliminary because they are working on some hazardous industries. So, for example, factories of Norilsk, Nickel, or Rusal, or other companies that really pollute our environment. But economy-wise, they are actually getting hidden subsidy. But, those of us that are working in the, service industry, they enter the pension age later on. And that's why we're siphoning money in your favor. So we are paying for these eco-predators, I would say. So you either make your production more eco-friendly or make our pensions, with the lesser age. Until we do so, we won't be able to change because we're talking here about health care, about other benefits. So until Unilever that is implementing new technologies, they are paying Rusal to doing that. My second question is that our active movement is dealing with the landfills, and we help Moscow region to fight with illegal landfills. And climate change, it's not some abstract thing. For example, we closed down the illegal landfill in Kuchino neighborhood. They actually dump about 5,000 cubic meters of trash per hour. This is almost all carbon-based. It's methane, 55%, and the rest is CO2. Now, we have a massive recultivation initiative, about 400 cubic meters. That's not enough, and we actually, commissioning modern equipment from Germany. So, Ms. Bakhtina said that you are ready to pay for green energy. Do you know the problem here is that we don't have, a stop signal before this green energy, but we have the issue of deforestation as well. We first have to pay for recultivation first, because I'm about to finish. So it costs 4 billion rubles. That's about €500,000. So we either burn it and emission it all to the atmosphere, or we keep it and it's going to pollute our earth. We can't negotiate with our environmental experts to launch this electricity in our electric grid. We are ready to give it for free. What's your question, and who should you address it? My question is very simple. So, how long are we going to pay the subsidies and the bribes to these eco-predators? My second question is that green energy is not some abstract, pondering about some future. I think that the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources is not working properly to do any of that. Thank you. Thank you. Dear colleagues, do we have any comments, or we are moving along? Thank you. Let's continue. I have a big request. It's not a presentation. Please just ask short questions. Let's respect each other's time. Good afternoon. Check, 1, 2, 3. Yes, thank you. The subject of this session is called Government and Business Partnership, and all your presentation was focused on the responsibility of business in front of a government or for the people. But when didn't you mention the responsibility of the government itself for the people and the business? Because the government is also a consumer of dirty technologies, and it also, contributes to the emissions. I actually spoke about this yesterday, that we don't have representatives of government, and why are we raising hands here? Where are the representatives of the State Duma, of the Parliament, or I don't know, administration of the president or some other governmental structures? We haven't heard the position of the government on any sort of concrete initiatives on responsibilities that they have to bear. I think that the state itself should spearhead this initiative and be the role model for all of us. It should give example to business as well, not just the individual people. You should first clean your own house, not try to adapt some best practices from overseas before you do that. Let's just clean house in Russia first and then implement these green technologies at least in our governmental facilities. My question is to the representatives of Russian government, what is our government planning to do in this regard? And how are you going to play part in that? And another question to the representatives of Sberbank. You had a very good presentation. I have the same question to you. How do you plan to implement financing of these events and initiatives? Yesterday in my speech I said that we are ready to, I would like to, support the representatives of small and medium businesses. We shouldn't build more boilers. We actually have to eliminate them as class because they shouldn't burn more gas or, other fuels. Just use natural pumps. And we guarantee the cutting costs of your budgets. We do. And we are, diminishing the budget, and we are cutting emissions at least up until 0%. And somebody, I think it was Mr. Yulkin, said that we're looking only in 5 to 10 years ahead of us. But technologies are looking 50 to 100 years ahead of us that we're going to use them.
You have mentioned Kemerova. Can we stop? We will answer that question partially, if we may. Yes, please. It's a pity that a good slogan, don't ask the country what it gave to you, and ask yourself what you can give a country, but it was born in the United States, where everything is fine with energy efficiency. This is to start with the answer, but the answer what the government is going to do with that in terms with the climate policy. Please log on to the Ministry of Natural Resources website and familiarize yourself with the report on the delivery of the complex or integrated climate doctrine. It is written there clearly what the Ministry of Energy has been doing in terms of renewables, what has been done by the Ministry of Natural Resources, the Ministry of Construction. To say that the country is doing nothing, we're just waiting, it's not fair. It's not fair to say what should the country do for us. Please take a look at that report of the climate plan deployment. It's very clearly stated there. Hello, Yekaterina Dobromyslova. I am a micro-business representative representing an energy taxi project launched in the city of Chelyabinsk by an activist, Dmitry Zakalukin, who has launched the first in Russia accumulator battery recycling factory. And I would like to do that in Moscow. And I want to say that a vertical cooperation between business, even smaller business, merges with the state. And I think that responsibility for accumulation of waste and their sorting depends on us, residents of the city. And our project is about segregated litter collection, so we can put their containers. We can appoint operators, but it's residents who accumulate that rubbish, and we need to make that idea popular. I mean, segregation and divided collection of litter. I would like to say a few words about my project and probably to seek for an information support from the state in that area for the people to understand how important is to segregate litter at home. All right, and the last question from that wing. Good afternoon. Thank you for a wide outlook on the economic and environmental situation for major state corporations. The question is as follows. Now, the Russian priority is comfortable urban environment. The question is this environment an eco-friendly one? And if yes, are there any examples from laws or from programs that would follow that idea at the city level? Because cities are a unique platform to launch new initiatives, technologies, and their commissioning. Who are you asking this question? To all, to governmental representatives, business institutes, because all is part of that process. So if there are any real projects at city levels, because we used to have, I know that big factories and enterprise is a good thing, but we know that our colleague from the UK has rightly mentioned that there is a high interest from the wide audience, and that fosters that process of popularization. Following the break at the Green Finance Session, there will be a project about upgrade of street lighting by a private company with the municipal authorities. It's an interesting project, and please be there. We will tell you about that experience. All right, thanks a lot. We need to wrap it up. Thanks to all speakers. I think we were able to have a good and clear picture. Dear Oleg, dear colleagues, I would like to wish you and your companies success. And once again, thanks to Moscow government and Department of Natural Resources Use and curators from Moscow government for an ideal organization of today's event. And we are ready to move on. Thank you. Well, colleagues, thanks a lot. The session is over. I join Katya's in her welcome speech, and thanks to interpreters. Thank you.